I started this several months back, series through Ecclesiastes. I think it was back in the fall time. And the last installment of it, we've had two so far, was in January, I believe. So apparently the Lord wants you to meditate on these, for great lengths of time between sessions or messages. And it's interesting how the Lord works. Something I found out as a young guy, young preacher in ministry. Oftentimes, the stuff you're working on, the messages you're working on, is exactly what you need that week. And I found that true with the Ecclesiastes message this week. It was just something the Lord really spoke to my heart about. Was a challenge to me, something I needed to hear this week, and I hope it's the same for you. And I hope it's a blessing and a challenge and encouragement to you this week. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Since it has been so long, I kind of wanted to begin with a bit of an introduction to what we studied the last couple messages. Don't worry, I'm not going to preach the last two all the way through. But I do want to do a review just for our sake to catch us up to where we're at here in chapter 3. You might remember in the first message, we only got through verses 1 through 3, taking time to focus on the author, King Solomon, the kind of man that he was, what he had at his disposal, a bit of the context surrounding the book itself, all leading to the conclusion that the question which Solomon is despairing over and trying to answer is the one in which he, out of any man in the world and all of history, was qualified to answer, okay? Solomon was the man that had everything he could possibly want, right? This isn't just the thoughts, the begrudged thoughts of a man that didn't have anything in life and was all upset about things. He had everything, so he has every right to talk about what he's talking about in this passage. On the enjoyment of life or the pleasure that we find in life. And it kind of all led to the thesis statement there in verse 3, which we can look there real quick, Ecclesiastes 1:3. It says, "What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun?" I realize that's a question. You cannot have a question to be a thesis statement, but it's a rhetorical question, and I'm going to say it works. So that is really, though, his thesis statement there. He's asking the question, which is the rhetorical question, obvious answer, that there is no profit to what's in this world on its own. And it's kind of it's a rough message to hear, right? And that first message that we went into back in the fall time was entitled Despair, Despair, Despair. And that's the idea you get right at the beginning of Solomon's message here, talking about the emptiness. Our last message back in, I think, January was entitled Pleasure's Emptiness and Despair's Purpose. And that covered chapters 1 and 2, so we covered a whole lot more ground there. And we took time talking about Solomon's endeavors in life. And in chapter 2 there specifically, he talked about what he did, what he tried to do to find happiness, to find pleasure. He partied, he built, he shopped, he consumed. And he did whatever he could to try to find whatever pleasure the world could offer him. And where did it leave him? He was still in despair, right? So he didn't find the answer there. And in chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, it says, "So I was great and increased," this is Solomon talking, "so I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatsoever mine eyes desired I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all my works, and that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun." But we notice there, and it's getting kind of depressing, right? And I felt bad about, last two messages being so depressing, but that was what Solomon was talking about. But he leaves with a glimmer of hope at the end there, and that's where we ended last time, in verses 24 through 26. And at this point, you kind of think that Solomon is going to talk about how terrible finding pleasure in life is, right? And he's talking about how bad it is, how, the pleasures of this world are not worth it, they're not satisfying. Therefore, we're assuming his conclusion here is going to be, forget it. Just get through this life, ignore the world, don't try to find happiness, don't try to find pleasure in this world. It's not there, but it's not what he does. In verse 24 through 26, he says, "There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor." Okay, so he says the exact opposite. He says to enjoy what you're doing. So this is it's getting confusing now. "This also I say, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit." So what is he saying? He's saying enjoy life, but there's kind of a little qualifier here that we kind of caught there at the very beginning. In verse 24, he says it's all at the hand of God. And to enjoy these things, there's got to be something present. And I heard an example of this from another pastor that I thought was really good. I'm going to give it to you. And it's kind of like a math or algebra equation here, it was funny me talking about that because I'm terrible at math and algebra. But the example works. So picture this equation, all right? You have the beginning of the equation, the first part of it is parentheses, okay? And within that parentheses, you have life's circumstances or the good things in life that you enjoy, okay? So you can plug in there, your family. That's a good thing. You can plug in there plus your job, your good job that you have, the job you enjoy, plus your golf game that you play every week. Whatever. You throw in there the things that you enjoy in life, and the sum of it all is in that parentheses, that first part of the equation there, okay? And so that could be a lot for some people. I mean, that you could be, if you started thinking through things, all the things that you enjoy in life, the things that you have, looking pretty good. This plus this plus this plus this. You might have 100, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 things that you add up in that parentheses, okay? And so we're getting to the equal sign here, which is going to result in your enjoyment level, okay? So we move on here from that first parentheses, and we have a multiplication sign, and then another parentheses, okay? So you have to take whatever the sum of that, the first parentheses, multiply it by the next. You following this? And so the next parentheses is basically God, or God's presence in the situation, okay? So you take whatever the sum of your life's enjoyment, you multiply that by God, what you include God in, okay? And then the equal sign comes after that, and whatever that, and then the result is your enjoyment level in life. That's kind of what Solomon's trying to get at here, okay, within that equation. What do we try to do so often? We just take the first part of the equation, okay? We forget about the second, and we just add up everything that we possibly can in this life, okay? All the good things, we think it looks good, and then we get to the result, the end of it, and we multiply it by God's involvement or the level of involvement that we brought God into our situation, into our life, and so often it's zero. And when you multiply something by zero, what do you get? You get zero. And so we're confused and we think, wow, I did everything the world said. I accumulated everything I thought I could have or needed to have happiness, and what happened? Why is my result zero? God wasn't in it. God's blessing was not in it. And that's kind of the equation. That's what Solomon was trying to get across in this passage, in this first discourse in chapters 1 and 2. Ultimately, God's desire for us is to find happiness, to enjoy life. Solomon calls these things a gift from God. So it's not wrong to find enjoyment in life. But that gift from God must be enjoyed in the right place for the glory of God. And we're going to see more in this theme here in chapter 3 where we're at today. And it's here in chapter 3 that Solomon gives, or kind of shifts gears here a little bit. And what we saw in the last message is what is considered the first discourse in Solomon's book of Ecclesiastes. So chapter 1, chapter 2, which was what we looked at in the last messages, that was the first discourse, okay? We've concluded that. And within that, chapter 1 and 2, we learned that pleasure apart from God brings no satisfaction. Pleasure apart from God brings no satisfaction. Now here in chapter 3, we see Solomon's second dissertation discourse, okay? Which I'm going to call Faith in God's Providence Brings Peace. Faith in God's providence brings peace. This is Solomon. He's starting his second round here, second message within the book of Ecclesiastes. Faith in God's providence brings peace. And Solomon begins here in the first 8 verses reciting what is a extremely eloquent poem, and one that is very familiar to people both inside and outside the realm of Christianity, okay? And it may have the title, even in your Bibles, of A Time for Everything. Very familiar. We've all read it. We've all heard it. We've heard it out in the world a lot. I did a little research on this involvement of this passage within the society, within the world. And apparently back in the 60s, some of you might remember this. I sure don't. The group called the Byrds. I don't know anything about them. Okay, some of you do though. And bringing back memories, right? But the Byrds made this song very popular in their song "Turn, Turn, Turn," and or in parentheses after that, it's "To everything there is a season." And the Byrds were able to transform these verses into, apparently it was an anti-Vietnam pro-peace song. And following the last couplet here in verse 8, a time for war and a time for peace, the Byrds added a little phrase, I swear it's not too late, okay? Promoting the, the peace side of it. Which when you think about it, when it's talking about there's a time for everything, if you were logical, you'd think, okay, that maybe this is a time for war, But apparently they just wanted peace, so they only focused on the peace part there. More recently, Paul Van Dyke, artist, came out with a song called Time of Our Lives, which also basically takes the passage and recites it in the verses, but he adds his own little twist to it at the same time. And then he gets to the chorus, and he basically focuses on enjoying the life as you have it now, okay? He says, this is the time of our lives, this is the time of our lives, this is the time of our lives. And he just repeats that over and over and over again. That's the chorus. Very well-written song. But that's kind of the sum of it, okay, for what the world views on this verse, okay? The reality is everybody kind of associates with it, right? Because it makes sense. The reality is we have tons of seasons in life that they vary, right? And if you're in this world, you're part of the world, you experience these different seasons. The world doesn't ignore that. They don't try to discard that. They accept it. But how they interpret it is interesting. And his interpretation in this song was, there's a time for it all. Enjoy it while you can. Live life in the moment. Enjoy it while you can. That's kind of just, that's it, That's what the world thinks of this passage here, and they turn it kind of to their own motives. But let's go ahead and read here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We'll read through verse 8. He says, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the sun, under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time to war and a time of peace. As we begin here, the first thing we're going to notice in these first 8 verses is point 1, change is everything. Change is everything. So Solomon goes through these lists of 28 events or seasons in life that can happen within a lifespan of someone, things that we experience. And this isn't rocket science here. He gives a good thing and then he proceeds to give the alternate or the bad side of it, okay? All things going towards his theme here, all right? What is the purpose of it all? That's the big question that he's trying to answer. What is the purpose of all these things? What is the purpose of life? And here's what is in life. This is what happens. And if you just take verse 8, these first 8 verses at face value and rip them out of context like the world so often does, what is the answer? I've never been good at math, obviously, as I said before, but 14, if you divide this by 2, 14 plus a negative 14 is what? You get 0, okay? So that's kind of what's going on here. You got 28 things, 14 good, 14 bad. At the end of it all, you live and you die, okay? That's it. You live, you die. Everything in between is just another, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. In the end, born, you're good thing, dead, bad thing. That's it. That's life. That's what he kind of leaves it at. And that's exactly what Solomon says in verse 9. Look there. He says, what profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboreth? We have another rhetorical question here. He likes those. Solomon likes those rhetorical questions for some reason. But it has the clear, obvious answer. There is no profit in life itself. Unless what? Remember what we learned in the first discourse about satisfaction. Unless we include God in the equation. So let me ask you a question here. As you look back through verses 1 through 8, talking about the seasons of life, ask yourself this. What control does man have over these seasons? What control does man have over the seasons that Solomon lists here? Or what does man do to bring these seasons to pass? When you really think about it, nothing. Do we choose when we can successfully plant crops? We make the decision to plant crops, sure, but what happens if we decide, in December we're going to plant some roses? Or whatever, maybe roses work in December, I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but you name it, okay? Who controls when we can or can't plant things in this world, in the world of plants and food and all that? God does, right? Not us. We can't decide that. Do we choose when we can be born or when we can die? No. God has that. Can we choose when to cry or when to laugh? We choose to do so, but those are usually motivated by something. I don't come home from a long day of work and, kiss my wife and say, hey, listen, I haven't cried in 3 days. I got to go upstairs, okay? I got to just have a cry session, get it out, and I'll be back down, okay? We don't schedule those things, right? Those are results of circumstances that happen in life, okay? So we are not in control of this, all right? All of these circumstances, and that is what Solomon is trying to get across here. So what's the problem? Ultimately, Solomon's book here is focusing on what? Okay, we know this, the vanity of life, right? And vanity means what? It means emptiness. Okay, it'll be a review here. So vanity means emptiness, and what does emptiness lead to, or what does emptiness ultimately bring in life? When you feel empty, what are you? You're dissatisfied, right? You following this? So you're dissatisfied, you're struggling with dissatisfaction in life. And what really is dissatisfaction? It's your inability to control something. Okay, this is important. Dissatisfaction is your inability to control something. Think about it. You have relationship problems with someone, ultimately why? Because you can't control that person and they're doing something that you don't like. If you could control that person and do it, and they did exactly what you said, you wouldn't be dissatisfied, right? You have financial problems ultimately because what? You can't control the amount of cash flow. You can't control the job. You can't control, there's a lot of things you can't control. You plug it in there. The list goes on. Every one of your dissatisfactions in life right now is a result of you not being able to control the circumstance. What does society, what does America tell us? What is the theme that lights up every kid's movie and book when it comes to life? You can control your destiny. Control is a good thing. When you grow up in this world, you go to school, you get your education, you go to college, you get a good job. Why? So you can control your future. Your future is in your hands. You're in control of it, right? That's what the world wants us to think. It's a lie. We're not in control of things, are we? And sooner or later, we do figure that out, whether it's the easy way or the hard way. All we really have is the ability to react and adapt to what life throws at us. That's the truth of it. That's the reality of it. And the world hates that. The world hates to admit that. We want to be in control, don't we? Solomon here is hitting on a key fallacy of life. The fallacy that satisfaction comes when you have the ability to control as much as you can in life. So not only do we see that satisfaction through pleasure in life is wrong, that we saw in chapters 1 and chapters 2, but we also see that seeking satisfaction through control is wrong. It won't work. It's a fallacy. Control that we don't have and we never will have. We see this time and time again, right? Even the world knows the truth of this. The successful businessman who controls his company, right? He controls his finances. He controls his family. He controls his possessions. He's in control, and the world looks at that and says, that's where I want to get. Man, in life, I'm so dissatisfied. Life is so hard right now, but if I can attain what this man over here has attained, he has it together. His life is together. Look at this. He's got the job. He made himself into a successful businessman. He has the money. Look at his house. Look at his cars. Look at the pool in the backyard. Man, he has it all. He's in control. That he took life by the horns and he made it happen. Then what happens? Unseen things that happen, right? So he goes into work and finds out the stock market crashed and he lost everything maybe. Or he walks into a board meeting and the board suddenly decides out of nowhere that the company's not going the direction they think it should, and they take it away from him, take his company away. He goes back home and finds out his family just up and left him. Why? Because he was spending so much time controlling his business. Eventually, sooner or later, we find out we are not in control. And the world finds this out, yet we never seem to figure it out, We continue to pursue, we continue to push, we continue to try to be in control of life. And this is what Solomon's trying to get across. Those first 8 verses, life happens and we don't have control over it. And that can be a real scary thing, can't it? But that's the point. We often feel most secure, most satisfied when we feel we are in control of life. No matter how hard we try, no matter what we do, ultimately man controls very little in what happens in our lifetime, don't they? The dangerous thing I think here, especially among believers, is that we often excuse this kind of control freak living by saying something like, oh, Pastor, come on, I'm trying to be responsible. I'm just trying to be very responsible. I'm trying to be a good steward of my life. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, that's a good thing. You want to be responsible. You want to be a good steward. That's biblical. But be careful, because we can disguise what I'm talking about here under the guise of responsibility. So let me ask you this. How do you respond when the things that you were trying to control in the name of responsibility don't always work out? How do we respond when things completely fall apart that we desire to have control over? We want to be responsible, right? So we're responsible. We're controlling things because that's what God told us to do. What happens is a great test. What happens when it falls through? What happens when things just don't quite pan out the way you thought they were? How do you respond? Dads, when things don't go right in the home, and then all of a sudden you realize you didn't have control over a situation like you thought you did. What is your response to that? Do you become dissatisfied? Is it obvious? Are you extremely upset, dissatisfied with your family, with the event that happened? Does anxiety come immediately? It's a telltale sign that you're putting too much stock in control. We don't find our satisfaction. We don't find our peace, our joy through control. So this brings us now to verses 10 through 11. We've seen that change is everything. We can't avoid it. Change happens in life and we have no control. Number 2 here, verses 10 through 11, we see that limitations are a reality. Limitations are a reality. Verse 10 through 11 there says, I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. Notice here, he hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he has set the world in their hearts so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. Now the word everything there in verse 11 picks up with the word everything in verse 1. You kind of reference back there. The point of verse 11 here is that God makes everything, even events that occur through human agency, happen in its proper time. And for most of us here today, that aspect of it isn't necessarily a problem, okay? What I mean by that is this. Most here today aren't going to argue with me on the sovereignty of God, right? You're going to admit that, that God is sovereign, God is in control of things. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that, but it's not that we don't believe that, okay? Most in here would agree with that, all right? Those that believe in God do or should believe in the sovereignty of God, that he does control all. But the difficulty, I think, for us as believers comes here in verse 11, that we don't always understand his purposes, that we don't always trust his purposes. We ask questions like, why was I born this way? Why did my family treat me this way? Why did my dad, my mom treat me this way? God, why did you take away my friend, my best friend? Why am I missing out on this blessing or this blessing over here? Why is this financial need not being taken care of, God? Why is my marriage struggling? Why am I not as athletic, as smart, as good-looking as this guy over here, God? We know he's in control, and we readily admit it, and so we go to him and what? We don't trust what he's saying here in this passage, what Solomon is saying about God. Our problem is that we focus our attention on the wrong thing. Instead of handing the reins over to God and trusting that he knows best, that he is in control, we get frustrated. Why? Mainly because we can't see the end, can we? That's scary. The truth that Solomon is trying to communicate here is that he, God, makes everything beautiful in his time. You know what? That includes the death in your family. That includes the lost job. That includes that relationship problem that you're having. That includes how you were born. We don't have a problem trusting that God's sovereign, that God's in control, but we do have a problem trusting that it is in our best interest. We struggle with that. Why? Because we think we know what is in our best interest, don't we? We think we know what is good and what is bad and what we need and what we don't need. And so we look to God and we say, God, this is good for me. I know it's good for me. Why aren't you giving it to me? We don't trust this passage that God is working how many things for his good? To be beautiful? Everything. Working everything, every situation, every circumstance, he works for our good, for his beauty, for his glory. That is a promise, that is a commitment right there that we so often fail to claim and fail to believe in. The only way through this life of uncertainty, of uncontrolled circumstances, is not just believing in a sovereign God, but believing, trusting that he is in control and that he has our best interest at heart. If you notice in verse 11, he says, also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. That word world there, in the Hebrew, that actually literally means forever, everlasting, or eternal. And meaning that God has set on the hearts of men the truth of a what? Of an eternal state. Now, why would he say that? And this is interesting. It's saying that God has put on the heart of every single man the reality, the idea, the question of an eternity somewhere. That's good stuff right there. Why does he do that? And there's been studies that have been done on societies throughout history. And every culture, every society, every tribe, throughout all of history, at some point, within their religion, within what they believe, their worldview, there is something about an eternity in there. Why is that? Right here. God puts it in our hearts, that desire. And as believers, that is something that we hold on to. He puts it there to draw people to him, but for believers, those that already trust in him, that is a promise that we can claim. That we have an eternity to look forward to, something to hope in. This is encouraging stuff right here. This truth gives us purpose in life, and God intended it that way. So we've seen that life, whether we like it or not, involves change. Changes that are pleasant, some that aren't. We've seen that the reality of our limitations, and now finally I want to see our potential result in all of this. What is our potential result of all of this? At this point in Solomon's discourse or message, if you're like me, you're reading this through and you're kind of almost expecting what we thought back in chapters 1 and 2. A command to, okay, give it up. Life has its seasons. They all, everything's good, bad. Just get through it, get over it, and then wait for the kingdom to come. That is a good purpose. But is that really his message right here, to just give up on life and wait for the kingdom to come? No, he's not saying that. Follow along here in verses 12 through 15. He says, I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is what? The gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor can anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. Solomon here says that one of the greatest responses to this life is to make the most of it. Not to retrieve from it, but to make the most of it. And this isn't in a hedonistic sense, okay? He's not saying go out and just find pleasures wherever you can, no matter what, okay? He's not promoting a hedonistic lifestyle here. But this is in a spiritual sense. We enjoy life by including God in all that we do and being filled with joy. Solomon declares, biblical faith is a call to joy. Did you hear that? Faith in God is like a license for joy as a believer. Faith brings freedom to enjoy life. When you believe in God, not just that God is sovereign, but that God is in control and that he's working everything to be beautiful in your life for his glory, we have freedom in that. Freedom to enjoy life knowing that God is taking care of everything. Some of us understand the reality of verses 1 and 8 all too well, or 1 through 8. We readily admit that we do not have control. And we constantly are worrying that today might be the day that we get in a car accident. Today might be the day that someone breaks into my house. Today might be the day that I'm diagnosed with cancer. Today might be the day that you name it. You name the fear that you're worrying about. You understand that there are seasons in life. And we almost have this fear like, I'm in a good season right now. Here it comes. Something bad's coming. I know it. It's around the corner. I'm ready. I got to get ready. I got to buckle down. And you live in fear. You live in this anxiety of what's going to happen next. Where's the joy in that? The world lives that way. They try not to, but ultimately that's how they live. They have no hope. Where's the joy in that as a believer? Why do we do that as believers in Christ? There's no joy in that. Solomon is saying you don't have to live that way. When you believe, number one, that God is sovereign, number two, that God's desire is to make everything beautiful, then true joy can be attained. Solomon's not advocating here for a lack of pleasure and joy in this life. He's saying find it, but don't forget about God in the equation. It's a vital part. It's the most important part. The reality is that life isn't easy, is it? I'm not ignoring that. I'm not trying to make light of trials in life. It's filled with all kinds of pressures from people, projects, pursuits, failures, discouragements. The reality is that I might find out next week that I have cancer. That's a reality. That could happen maybe. I might go home today and my house is burnt down. I might find that someone stole my identity next week or the week after that. I may get the phone call saying that a loved one has passed away in a month or two. But do we have to live in fear of that? No, we don't. And again, I'm not making light of those things, especially those that have gone through those things. Those are hard things to go through. But what can we trust? What's the promise? God makes everything what? Beautiful. And whether we like it or not, whether it feels good at the time or not, trust that the sovereign God is in control of the situation. And when we believe that, when we truly trust that that is what is going on in life, we are free. We are so free to just enjoy it. And trust that, you know what, if I do get cancer next week, God was in control of that, and that is for the best in my life. And he's going to work that some magical, beautiful way to be beautiful for him. I can't help as I'm talking about this to think about my wife Megan's youth pastor. That did happen. He had a tumor and he died. And he had a phrase. I can't remember it off the top of my head. You remember what it was? Yeah, even if it's not okay, it's okay. And I never forget that. I just did, but, when I'm not on the spot, I don't forget it. I'll say it that way. But it's a beautiful, beautiful way to think of things. Even if it's not okay, it's okay. What's he mean by that? God is in control, And even though the world says this isn't okay, he had a peace, he had a joy that even though he was in the middle of cancer, he was dying from it. He had a beautiful wife, a little girl. He was going to leave. That doesn't sound okay. But it was okay. Because he trusts that God was working everything to be beautiful. Solomon here in verses 14 through 15 leaves us with a final command, and it can be summed up in two words: fear God. Fear God. He says in verse 14, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. In these last two verses, we see that God's work is permanent. It is complete. Everything that he does is awe-inspiring. This is why Solomon says that we should fear God. And that literally means to fear before him. And we're not talking here about a paralyzing terror of God, but rather a commitment of total being and trust and believing in the living God and standing in awe of him. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to go fishing for a couple hours. And every time I do this, it's great. I love it because it's relaxing and you get to enjoy the creation of God. And you just sit around and you stand in awe of what it is that he has created and what it is that he has done. And you just can't help but just say, God, wow. And the God that created all of that so meticulously, so detailed that we don't even fully understand it all. That's the God that is loving you, that is working everything out to be beautiful in your life for his glory. God wants us to stand in awe of who he is and all that he is. When we do so, we will understand just how temporary this life really is in contrast to an eternal God. So as we close here, I want to ask, are you struggling to find enjoyment in life? Are you the person whose satisfaction is decided by how much you can control in life? Be careful. That might seem to work for a while, but you'll reach a point when suddenly things are going to fall out from underneath and you're going to realize you don't have control. And that could be a hard thing to face, a hard lesson to learn. Don't put your joy, don't put your satisfaction in control. Perhaps you're on the other side of the coin. You're constantly anxious. You're constantly fearful of that which you can't control in life. You're aware of the bad things, the bad seasons of life, all too well aware. And you fear them day to day. You fear the unknown. We don't have to. Because we have a God that is sovereign and is working everything to his glory to make your life beautiful. That's our promise here in Ecclesiastes. Would you bow your heads?